I do think that motorsports has to evolve with its time. Do I think it's going to take over all parts of motorsports? I don't think so. But we have seen with Formula E, with different series, that it is possible to race electric cars. I do think it's still going to take some time.
Welcome to our Point B podcast, where we discuss the future of mobility and transportation products and services. Today, we have a very special guest for our listeners, and joining me is Romain Leroux, a true racing prodigy and member of Aston Martin's Young Driver Academy, winner of the 2021 GT4 French Racing Championship behind the wheel of an Aston Martin Vantage AMR. Romain earned the title of vice champion in the fiercely competitive 2022 ADAC GT4 Germany with Door Motorsports, and now he's a driver for Bullet Racing in the 2023 GTE World Champion Endurance Cup. Welcome to Point B, Romain.
Hello, thank you very much for having me here, and very nice introduction. Thank you very much.
So we're going to explore in depth a little bit more about how vehicle is being used on and off the racetrack and the similarities and advances in technology and how it's impacting both. But before we get started, let's talk a little bit about your career. What got you into racing at such a young age?
It's, first of all, a passion. Always had a passion for cars at first, not only racing cars, but cars in general. It runs in the family. So I was born going to racetracks, to rallies, very popular in Europe. Rallies used to be, and yeah, just the passion for watching cars, for the passion for the noise as well. I used to go to sleep when I was 6 or 7 years old to the Ferrari engine noises, which sounds very weird to a lot of people, but that's what I used to do. So I used to go to sleep with the F1 2004 Schumacher's Ferrari car going down the straight in Monza, and that used to be what I go to sleep with. And so it's just been ingrained in me my whole life, and that's what triggered me to want to start racing.
So you said your family. So your dad was, tell me more about your family racing history.
So it's on my father's side. My dad did a bit of rally when he was younger. A little competitive rally. He wasn't very, very good. Not enough to make it his career, but he had a lot of fun, and he's just been always passionate about cars. And my grandfather's passionate as well. He's from the Le Mans area, so Le Mans 24 hours is a very big thing for us. So yeah, it's just been a whole family adventure in a way.
As you go, you start at a young age, right? It's not just all about the driving. You have to understand the car, the engineering, the technology. That's what really makes a complete race car driver today. Is that correct?
Absolutely. At the start, you can always get away with just driving cars fast or karts fast. But at some point, there's a lot more that goes into it than just driving fast. There's the commercial aspect of it. So being presentable and being able to speak to sponsors, to teams, to customers, because at the end of the day, you sell race cars or you represent a brand. And there's also the technical side, being able to set up a car for yourself, but also for other drivers. If in endurance, if you're 3 drivers, you need to be able to compromise and drive around the setup of the car and be able to let the engineer know what you feel and being able to describe it the best way possible so that he can then do his job and set up the car in the right way.
That's a great kind of segue into some of the questions I was going to ask, because, you really, you're always trying to gain that critical edge, right? In terms of, how the car is set up, how you feel about the car, you are understanding, working with the engineers, I think is critical. It's like, you're a team, right? That comes together. But once you get in the car it's performing around the racetrack, I'm assuming that you're using data or feedback mechanisms to, improve that performance, understand what's going on in the racetrack. Is that kind of an accurate assessment?
Absolutely. There's more and more with new race cars. There's more and more we can do while you're on the track, on the data side of points to try and improve your driving. Back in the days in the 80s or even 70s, once the car was on the ground and driving, there's, apart from you as a driver, there's not much you could do to the race car to change it. But that's changing more and more. We're getting live telemetry now from the race car to the engineers on the pit wall, and there's a lot more tools we can use as drivers to help us through the different conditions. If you've got understeer or oversteer in the car, there's things you can try and adjust in the car, to live in the car, to try and help you go fast around the racetrack. So it's being more and more data driven as we go, and it's very interesting topics to study.
I mean, I don't want to move away from racing, but I just feel the similarities with most of the customers that I'm talking with is this kind of immediacy, this feedback loop, right? Where you're bringing your vehicle into your digital lifestyle, right? And so, but you're relying on data to do that. And you're trying to really transform, how you maintain a vehicle, even how you operate a vehicle.
Of course, there's a lot of data points that as a driver, I don't understand or don't use, because there are, I think on an Aston Martin race car, there are 1,000 or 1,500 data points. Different data points are downloaded live. I don't use all of them, but engineers do. And that's just how they get the most out of everything, every single aspect of the race car. And there's also, as you said, even for reliability issues, sometimes I do ask engineers why we do collect so many data points. And they just say that it just helps for any even maintenance, knowing how much you've used of a certain part or clutches or all these aspects of a race car. They just collect data and they don't need it until a certain point where they analyze it and they just know if they need to change that part. If they don't, how much mileage it's got, how much it's been used, and all these is just helpful data for them to avoid any problems during a race weekend and anticipate anything that needs to be changed, which that's why we get a lot less failures in any kind of motorsports, and even on the road. It's thanks to data in a way.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. It's fascinating because you're describing what's taking place, I would say, outside of racing, where there's a lot of data that's available off of a vehicle, right? Getting that data to the right people within the company to understand how these vehicles are performing based on how you expected them to perform, how they're being used, but then also taking that information and giving it in an abstracted way to the driver of the vehicle so that they know how to use that data for what they're trying to accomplish, whether they're trying to get more efficiency out of their vehicle, if they're trying to maintain their vehicle in a more optimized way, even coaching, right?
Exactly. We use, as drivers, we use a lot of data to get better around the racetrack. So it's data sheets we get are quite complex, and with a lot of different variables: braking pressure, throttle application, speed, gears. We spend most of our time on outside a race car is because we only get so much time on track. We spend a lot of time analyzing our own data points and our own driving lap times to try and improve and find the sometimes thousandths of a second we can find in changing one, in braking 5 meters later or 5 meters earlier, or changing something that's very minimal for us, but that makes a huge difference. And we combine that with the data we collect from the car and the engineers analyze to try and compromise to make our driving better and suit the car more. It's all at the end of the day, it's all about performance, and we all work together to find whatever time we can find to go as fast as possible.
Interesting. Like, you don't get as much track time probably as you want, so you're using that time off the track to the best of your advantage to take advantage of the data. And I'm assuming this is pretty much widespread within the racing community, right? I mean, everyone is using vehicle data in order to gain a competitive edge.
We often say data doesn't lie, and that's why we invest in it, is because it's the most accurate way to predict and get as much information as possible.
I think of Tom Cruise and Days of Thunder, and right, the fact that he just didn't understand the race car was interesting, right? It still applies today, because you cannot be a successful driver unless you understand the race car, unless you're using data, unless you're kind of getting this information back in order to gain a competitive advantage. You just will not be successful. And that was true back then when that movie came out. So,
and it's even more true today, because even I've seen it in the last 10 years I've been racing. Data has more, we get more and more data points, and data has become more and more important and faster, and we're just able to get access to things faster and in better quality and more precisely than we've ever done before.
So I got to ask, I think I know the answer to this already, but, software updates, right? So these vehicles are becoming more and more defined by software. Software is playing a critical role in how vehicles get set up, how they get tuned. I'm always thinking, okay, so maybe not in, a 2 or 3 hour race, but maybe in the 24-hour Le Mans race. Is there, you think, a point in time where vehicles will be updated with new software during the course of a race, like kind of changing calibration or changing, parts on the vehicle, even maybe not at the pit stops?
So it could happen. Right now, there's a lot of things, as I said, that we can do driving. So as us driving, we can switches around. We have different modes we can go into that are pre-uploaded to the car. Right now, we still have to plug a computer into the car to switch softwares around, modify these maps. I do think it is going to be possible one day. I think it could probably be already done. I think it's more of a regulation problem than a technological problem. But I do think more and more that this is going to happen. I see more and more rules going towards that. And the new Le Mans rules have so much data that needs to be analyzed to be able to meet the regulations, that at some point it is going to need to happen.
I'm always fascinated, like, pushing the boundaries, right? There are rules, regulations, right? I mean, it's no different when you're competing on the racetrack compared to government regulations, country by country. Everyone's always trying to get a competitive advantage, but you have to stay within the rules. So I think that's always important. But, delivering updates and software to a vehicle during a race could be quite interesting. So tell me a little bit more about like race strategy and decision making and how data is used. You're setting up the vehicle, but you also have to maintain that vehicle throughout the race.
Yeah, so that's where live telemetry comes into play a lot. Receiving live data from the car helps teams so much to actually prepare for what they're going to do, because at some point, that approximately for a GT3, every hour you need to come in for fuel and tires. But with that live data, you can predict if there is something else you need to do. For example, if a driver on the radio says he's feeling something weird on the rear right corner, for example, you engineers can go through live telemetry and see the damper settings, the suspension sensors, see if everything's working right. If it's a power issue, they can analyze, and that just in the end saves time. So once you get to the pit stop or you get in front of your engineers and mechanics, most of the time they already know what's wrong with the car and they've already got everything prepared, compared to before where you just arrived at the pit stop saying, I've got a problem at the rear right corner and we need to check something out, and it takes 5 minutes to figure out what's wrong, and then you need to get to changing it. Telemetry has, and having so many data points has enabled teams to just make that time shorter and make it before the driver stops. Yeah, just to save time.
I didn't even think about that, right? Because you're right. It's saving time.
Yeah.
I see it every day in the work that we do, which is before the customer shows up with the vehicle, you know, you have to service something on the vehicle. The service center already knows what's wrong because they have the data. So you're in and out faster. You save time, you know, in your case, it's a couple minutes. In the customer's, you know, it might even be days because the part might have already been ordered as a replacement because they can see that data. And that creates that kind of, you know, better experience, a winning strategy, right?
Absolutely. Motorsports is just a fraction of what the automotive industry is, but I think it's a good reflection of the way things are moving towards, and it's amplified reality of what the automotive industry is like in general.
Yeah, I like it too. And, you know, we're doing a lot of work in the area of prognostics, trying to predict problems, right? Get it into machine learning algorithms, looking for data outliers and, you know, understanding if something is about to happen and, you know, fixing that issue before that truck goes out of service for a couple of days, because now the fault has occurred. Now it's too late. So we're using data to help predict failures before they even occur. You know, it's probably similar to what's going on in the racing area, right? Just looking deeper and deeper at the data, trying to predict things before they actually happen.
Yeah, we see very, very similar things. We're more, I think the focus, which is surprising as a industry or as a manufacturer, is more towards predicting failures than trying to stop failures, because at some point we are focused on trying to make parts reliability better, but it's also a sport where, you know, things are moving fast, a lot of load goes through parts and they're bound to break at some point. And there's more to save and to make the experience better by predicting when it's going to break, and telling us drivers or customers of road cars beforehand that this is going to break at some point and this is the median life of it, then trying to improve it by a little bit.
You know, we were joking beforehand a little bit before we started this podcast, and I told you I was watching Talladega on Sunday, and I told my wife that I'm predicting there's going to be a crash here in the last few laps, and sure enough there was, because they were bunched up, and there's so much, you know, at 200 miles an hour and you're inches away from each other. You know, it's going to be an exciting finish, but it's also going to be a dangerous finish. Can you tell me a little bit more about how you look at NASCAR versus the type of racing that you're doing today, and kind of what are the similarities, what are the differences, and kind of how you see, you know, racing, you know, evolving here over the next few years?
I find NASCAR very intriguing, mostly over races. It's often said in the most European scene that NASCAR is very boring, which I don't agree with at all. Even though they turn left a lot and only left, which is something we joke around a lot about. But it's watching, as you said. I didn't watch the whole Talladega race, but I watched the last 3 laps because it came up on my Instagram feed, and it's so impressive being able to race that fast, that close, for even though they crashed at the end, for 5-6 laps, being able to do that. And it's a whole different strategy that comes into play compared to the kind of racing that I do. The jobs that spotters have to do is impressive. It's very different things you have to watch out for and calculate for than the racing I'm doing. I'm more an endurance driver, so I'm racing for 6, 12, 24-hour races around Spa or Monza, so bigger racetracks, straights and then corners. And for motorsports as a whole, I think there's always been those very big differences between NASCAR in the US, which is very popular. Sports car racing and endurance racing is coming back very, very big in world endurance in IMSA with the hypercars. And I think it's a fascinating moment to be in motorsports. As a Le Mans fan, and I've been to Le Mans a lot, these last few years have drawn in a lot of people, record crowds. So I think motorsport still excites people a lot. I think manufacturers are starting to understand, after withdrawing from motorsports because of different reasons, they're starting to understand that there is reason to be in motorsports. And we're seeing a lot of brands that disappeared but weren't involved as much in motorsports coming back and investing the money into motorsports to just improve their brand image, but also improve their road cars through that. And I think I'm very excited for the future of motorsports.
Yeah, I think motorsports are fascinating. Maybe my analogy isn't great, but I think of the space programs from the 60s and 70s and all the great technology. It wasn't just about going to the moon. It was about the advances in computing technology. It was about the advances in science that really, kind of manifested its way into all parts of our lives. And it wasn't just about Tang, right, where you got the instant orange juice. It was about, the development of the semiconductor. I see motorsports as that incubator for technology that is going to impact our mobility experiences.
Exactly. And it's something I always get in discussion with people is how much actually comes out of motorsports in your everyday car and what technology actually came out of thanks to motorsports, and that actually helps and is used in your everyday life in your car. And I think people are starting to understand that and to actually understand why brands invest that much money into motorsports.
As a professional race car driver that has dedicated yourself to kind of understanding the vehicle, to driving behaviors, you still have to drive on public roads, right? You have to still drive with people like me. And you have to drive in very complex situations. You live in Paris. So I bet you that vehicle data to help coach non-professional drivers is probably something that, without you saying, you have to share the roads with those people. They could probably benefit from coaching from data from their vehicles.
Yes, definitely. And I think it wouldn't be we'd have different issues than us trying to find the last tenth of a second on a racetrack. But definitely, and I've got a younger sister that's actually applying for her driving license at the moment, and you can see that a lot more of the coaching is done on simulators now. At least in France, we have that a lot more, and it's a great way to be able to teach someone without the potential repercussions of actually being on the road, and it just gives people the confidence they need to be on the road and the awareness they need to be on the road.
Yeah, I hate to go down that tangent, but I had over 2 decades at General Motors. I got the opportunities on numerous occasions to go to, the tracks, basically the GM testing facilities, and drive on an area called Black Lake, where they would wet the roads and they would put you into a spin, basically, and do it with and without ABS turned on. But it was, my aha moment was, I wish 16-year-olds or 15-year-olds that are learning to drive could actually encounter, because these are situations that you do encounter. You go into a spin, whether it's on a snowy road, but how do you get out of those situations? That's something that you can't teach, right? I mean, we just can't afford to teach it. But with simulation, I'm hoping that technology kind of helps us all from that standpoint.
It definitely can. First of all, it's a lot cheaper to learn on a simulator than crashing your real car on the roads. But it definitely does, and it would be a great way forwards to be able to teach people on simulators before they head on the road and put them in difficult situations that you can't really afford them to be on the road, for danger aspects, for insurance aspects that you can do on the simulator, because it's not the same thing, but it still gives them the same sensations.
And what do you do in those types of situations, right? Which direction do you turn when your vehicle is going into a spin? It's sometimes counterintuitive. All right, so I got to ask you, let's switch your gears a little bit. I got to ask you about electric vehicle racing, and I got to ask you about, driverless vehicle racing. Like, what's going on in these areas? Do you think there's a future?
I think so. I do think that motorsports has to evolve with its time. Do I think it's going to take over all parts of motorsports? I don't think so. But we have seen with Formula E, with different series, that it is possible to race electric cars. I do think it's still going to take some time before we get the technology exactly right to be able to have longer races, because right now we're limited by battery capacity, and by the length of the races are very limited. But I do find it very interesting. I think there is an in between between fully petrol fuel racing and 100% electric. I think we're seeing it in Formula One, but in sports car racing as well, with hybrid engines, very powerful hybrid engines. And I think that's the way motorsports is going to have to go forwards. Electric is going to be part of the way sports cars or race cars produce power, because it's just a cleaner and better alternative.
We talk to a lot of companies that are advancing electric vehicle technology, and I am completely fully supporting that activity, because they're kind of building a future that I want to live in. I'm not so sure, I might have a myopic view of this, but I want them to preserve motorsport racing, because I can't imagine going to Talladega or Michigan International Speedway, watching a race that's very quiet. So, so I don't know how you reproduce that part of the experience in Formula E, but I haven't been to a Formula E race, but that's part of what you're doing there, part of that excitement, what happens. So
absolutely. But there's two aspects to it from a driver's perspective. Is, first of all, it needs to make sense for manufacturers to be involved. And in an era where a lot is going electric, you see less and less manufacturers willing to invest money, as we talked about before, in fully petrol backed series, because it doesn't make sense if they have 100% of their road car range as hybrid or electric. Would it make sense for them to then go and invest a lot of money in petrol cars? And then second, for the noise aspect, which is something, of course, I was going to sleep with a Ferrari's engine sound, so for sure it's something that's very close to me. But if you have time after this, go watch the start of the Cadillac hypercar coming out the pits. So this is what I was talking about. The hybrid engines is going to be a big aspect of it. If you hear what it sounds like, and I was 3 boxes down from them in Le Mans last year, and every time they came out the pits, it's their electric motor, so that does the start, and then it switches to the real engine, and just the sound it makes is unbelievable. And I think that's the good alternative for motorsports, to keep the engine sound, but to still have that electrical power to minimize emissions.
And I mean, that's the way I think about the electrification of the vehicle too, because, you know, there's segments of the mobility area that it makes total complete sense, right? And you're right, that was really interesting. You still have companies that want to invest in motorsports, but it has to align with the direction that they're taking their product lineup that is sold to the rest of us, right? And so we got to make sure that we keep pace with each other in this area. But, you know, this convergence of what's happening in motorsports with what's happening in the mobility space has been, you know, very fascinating to talk about. And again, thank you for joining me on Point B today. And I hope to have you back here soon. And let's get together and let's do a little racing on the track.
Of course, I'd be more than happy to show you what a real racing car is. A real Aston Martin race car. Not that you haven't, but yeah. Just to quickly say, it takes a lot of work to get to the position I'm in. But I'm very happy to have done the work. I don't treat it as a job. It often gets very serious, but you also need to enjoy what you're doing. And I try to enjoy every time I'm behind the wheel of a race car, because you don't know how long it's going to last. So yeah, and it's a lot of people's dream as well. So I need to take that into account and just make the best of it while I can.
Well, I think we could keep going on and on here, Romain, and talk about this stuff. But let's just get together. Let's get on the racetrack, and maybe we'll do a podcast live from the racetrack one day. So thank you again for joining me on Point B, and we'll look forward to talking to you again in the future.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.